Lily Chen, you're under arrest for grand theft and breaking and entering. Captain Richard Bennett's voice boomed across his dining room, loud enough for every family member seated around the Thanksgiving table to hear. His hand rested on the grip of his service weapon, eyes cold and satisfied as he stared at me like I was nothing more than street trash he'd finally caught. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. The Bennett family in all their upper-middle-class glory. Frozen mid-bite with forks hovering over perfectly carved turkey and gourmet side dishes that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. My name is Lily Chen. I'm 29 years old, and I never imagined my second Thanksgiving with my wife's family would end with my face pressed against their imported Italian marble floor. Dad, what are you doing? Sarah's voice cracked as she jumped up from her seat beside me. Her chair clattered backward, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. This is insane. Sit down, Sarah. Richard didn't even look at his daughter. His eyes stayed locked on me, burning with the kind of hatred I'd seen before in my line of work. The hatred of men who believe certain people don't belong in their world. Your friend here broke into the evidence locker at the precinct last night. Stole $15,000 in confiscated cash. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, someone's wine glass hitting the table. Sarah's mother, Patricia, clutched her pearl necklace like it might protect her from the scandal. Sarah's younger brother, Thomas, pulled out his phone, already recording. I started, but Richard moved fast for a man in his 50s. Within seconds, 2 other officers who'd been invited to the family dinner materialized behind me. Officer Martinez grabbed my left arm, while Officer Dawson took my right, yanking me up from my chair with enough force to hurt. You have the right to remain silent, Richard began, his voice dripping with satisfaction as he recited my Miranda rights in front of his entire family. This wasn't about justice. This was theater. This was humiliation designed to prove a point, that I wasn't good enough for his daughter, that I never would be. Sarah was screaming now, trying to pull the officers off me. She was with me last night. We were home watching movies. Dad, you know this is a lie. Multiple witnesses saw her leaving the precinct at 2 a.m., Sarah. Security footage. Her fingerprints on the locker. Richard's smile was thin and cruel as he pulled out his handcuffs. The expensive kind, not standard issue. He'd been planning this. I know this is hard to accept, but your wife is a criminal. I tried to warn you about people like her. People like her. The words hung in the air, loaded with everything he really meant. Poor, Asian, queer, an outsider who'd somehow convinced his precious daughter to marry her in a small ceremony he'd refused to attend 8 months ago. The cuffs bit into my wrists as Richard tightened them deliberately, making sure everyone could see. Making sure they understood that in his world he was the law, and the law always won. But here's what Captain Richard Bennett didn't know as he paraded me through his house toward the front door, past the shocked faces of his family and the flashing camera phones already uploading to social media. For the past 6 months, I'd been investigating him. Every dirty cop in the city knew Richard Bennett was corrupt, but no one had ever managed to prove it. Stolen evidence, planted drugs, false reports, protection money from local gangs. The man was a walking RICO case waiting to happen. And the private investigator he'd dismissed as a nobody, as unworthy of his daughter, had been documenting every single illegal move he'd made. I had bank statements showing deposits that didn't match his salary. I had photographs of him meeting with known criminals. I had audio recordings of him threatening witnesses. I had testimony from 3 different victims willing to go on record. And most importantly, I had digital evidence that he'd been planning to frame me for weeks, ever since Sarah told him we were thinking about starting a family. This arrest, this public humiliation at Thanksgiving dinner, this was supposed to be my ending. Richard thought he was destroying me in front of everyone who mattered, proving once and for all that I didn't belong. He had no idea he'd just walked into the most documented mistake of his career. As they shoved me into the police cruiser parked deliberately in the circular driveway where all the neighbors could see, I caught Sarah's eyes through the window. She was crying, her mother holding her back, but she mouthed 3 words. I believe you. That was all I needed. The cruiser pulled away from the Bennett mansion, past the manicured lawns and expensive cars, heading toward the precinct where Richard had already prepared my cell. He sat in the passenger seat, turning back to look at me with that same satisfied smile. "You should have stayed in your lane, Lily. People like you don't get happy endings with people like us." I said nothing. Just watched the houses blur past, thinking about the flash drive hidden in my office safe. Thinking about my former partner from my days on the force, Detective Marcus Rodriguez, who'd been waiting for my signal. Thinking about the federal prosecutor who'd been building a case against Richard for 2 years and just needed one more piece of evidence. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to see what happens when you underestimate the person you're trying to destroy. Because Captain Richard Bennett had just made his first critical mistake. He'd assumed that because I was quiet, I was powerless. Because I'd taken his insults and his prejudice with grace, he thought I would take this too. He'd forgotten that before I became a private investigator, I'd been a cop. A good one. Good enough that I'd walked away rather than become what he was. And I'd spent every day since then learning how to catch people exactly like him. The cruiser pulled into the precinct parking lot. Officers I used to work with stood outside, some looking confused, others looking away in shame. They knew something was wrong, but no one would challenge Richard Bennett. Not yet. As they processed me, took my mugshot, and threw me in a holding cell, I counted down the hours until morning. Until Marcus made the call. Until everything Richard had built came crashing down around him. He thought this was my nightmare. He had no idea it was about to become his. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and desperation. I'd been in cells before back when I wore a badge, but always on the other side of the bars. Never as the one locked inside. 3 hours passed before they moved me to interrogation. No water, no phone call. Just enough time for this story to spread through the precinct like wildfire. Lily Chen, the private investigator who used to be one of them, had turned into a thief. Richard let me sit in the interrogation room for another 2 hours before he walked in, carrying a folder thick with fabricated evidence. Officer Martinez stood behind him, looking uncomfortable. At least someone still had a conscience. "Here's how this goes," Richard said, dropping the folder on the metal table with a heavy thud. "You plead guilty to grand theft, serve 18 months minimum, and I'll make sure you're in a facility that's single quotes s ... relatively safe. For someone like you." The threat was clear. Prison was dangerous for former cops. Even more dangerous for queer women who didn't know how to keep their heads down. Or, I asked calmly, or we add breaking and entering, obstruction of justice, and assaulting an officer. You're looking at 5 to 7 years. And Sarah moves on with her life while you rot. He leaned forward, his breath reeking of the expensive bourbon he'd been drinking at dinner. "She's already starting to doubt you, Lily." I made sure of that. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral. "I want my phone call." "Sure, call whoever you want." "No one's coming to save you." He pushed the interrogation room phone across the table. "Your little pie business?" "I've already made calls. Your clients are dropping you as we speak." "Your reputation?" "Destroyed." "The rental on your office?" "Landlord's filing eviction papers tomorrow morning." He wasn't bluffing. Richard Bennett had spent 30 years building connections throughout the city. Judges, lawyers, business owners, politicians. One word from him and doors slammed shut. I'd known this was possible, but hearing it confirmed sent ice through my veins. I picked up the phone with shaking hands and dialed the only number I'd memorized besides Sarah's. It rang 4 times before Marcus answered. "Rodriguez." "It's me," I said quietly. There was a pause. Marcus knew better than to say anything incriminating over a precinct line. "I heard. Are you okay?" "I need a lawyer. The real kind. Already on it." "Sit tight." Richard laughed as I hung up. "Marcus Rodriguez? The detective who got demoted for testifying against his partner? That's your Dusin?" He used the Mandarin word mockingly, his pronunciation deliberately terrible. "Your hero?" "He's got no power here. Lily, he's barely holding on to his own badge." What Richard didn't know was that Marcus hadn't been demoted for testifying against a corrupt partner. He'd been strategically reassigned to internal affairs after he volunteered to help build cases against dirty cops from the inside. Marcus had been investigating Richard longer than I had. They fingerprinted me again, took DNA swabs, photographed every angle of my body like I was evidence in a crime scene. The process was designed to dehumanize, to make me feel small and powerless. Standard procedure for Richard's enemies. At 11 p.m., they finally let me make a second call. I dialed Sarah's cell, my hands trembling as the phone rang. Lily? Her voice was raw from crying. Baby, I didn't do this. You know I didn't do this. I know. She was whispering like someone might hear her. But my dad showed me security footage, Lily. It's you on the camera. Walking into the evidence room. Taking the money. How is that possible? My heart sank. Richard had gone further than I'd anticipated. Deepfake technology, probably. Or he'd found someone with similar build and features, dressed them in my clothes, made sure the camera angle was just ambiguous enough. Sophisticated frame job. Sarah, listen to me carefully. Do you remember last month when I asked you not to tell your father where I was going on Tuesdays and Thursdays? The therapy appointments you wouldn't talk about, she said slowly. I wasn't in therapy. I was meeting with someone who could help us. Someone who's been waiting for the right moment. I lowered my voice even more. I need you to trust me one more day. Just one more day. My mother wants me to file for separation. She says this is God's way of showing me I made a mistake. Sarah's voice broke. She called you a phase, Lily. Said I could still have a normal life if I just walked away now. The words cut deeper than the handcuffs had. Patricia Bennett had always been polite to my face, but I'd heard the whispers. The disapproving looks when Sarah held my hand at family events. The way she introduced me as Sarah's friend, even after we'd been married for months. Do you think you made a mistake? I asked, my throat tight. No. Sarah's answer was immediate and fierce. Never. But Lily, my dad is showing everyone edited security footage. He's given interviews to 2 news stations. Your face is all over social media with the word thief attached to it. How do we fight that? The same way I fought everything else, I said. By being better at this than he is. The line went quiet except for Sarah's breathing. Then, you've been investigating him, haven't you? All those late nights you said were stakeouts. The encrypted files on your laptop you wouldn't let me see. You've been building a case. My brilliant, perceptive wife. She'd figured it out. I can't talk about this on a precinct phone, I said carefully. But yes, and Sarah, he's scared. That's why he's doing this now. That's why it's so extreme. He knows something's coming. Lily Chen, visiting hours are over. Officer Dawson appeared at the door, his expression apologetic but firm. Hang up. I have to go, I told Sarah. Remember what I said? One more day. I love you, too. And Lily? Whatever you've been planning, whatever evidence you have, use it. Burn his whole world down. The line went dead before I could respond. They moved me to a cell in the women's section around midnight. The other inmates watched me with calculating eyes, trying to figure out what I was in for. Former cops didn't last long in general population. Everyone knew that. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the concrete ceiling, and ran through every piece of evidence in my mind. The photographs taken with a telephoto lens of Richard meeting with Marcus Snake Delgado, head of the Serpientes gang. The bank statements showing deposits of exactly $5,000 every 2 weeks, always in cash, never explained. The testimony from Maria Gonzalez, who'd watched Richard plant cocaine in her son's car before arresting him. The audio recording from the wire I'd worn to our last family dinner, where Richard had explicitly threatened to destroy my life if I didn't divorce Sarah. And the piece de resistance, evidence that Richard had been stealing from the evidence locker for years, selling confiscated drugs back onto the streets through his gang connections. The very crime he was now accusing me of. At 2 a.m., a guard I didn't recognize stopped by my cell. She was young Latina with intelligent eyes that reminded me of someone. Rodriguez says tomorrow morning, 9 in Federal Building. Everything's ready. She slipped a small piece of paper through the bars. Memorize this and flush it. I unfolded the paper. A single word. Checkmate. Marcus had gotten the warrant. The federal prosecutor was moving forward. In less than 7 hours, while Richard Bennett slept peacefully in his expensive house, believing he'd won, believing he'd successfully destroyed the woman who dared to love his daughter, federal agents would be serving him with indictments on 17 counts of corruption, theft, drug trafficking, and obstruction of justice. But lying in that cell, my wife crying alone in the house we'd bought together, my business collapsing, my reputation in pieces, I felt the full weight of what standing up to power actually cost. Even if we won tomorrow, even if Richard went to prison, the damage was done. Some of my clients would never come back. Some of Sarah's family would never forgive her for choosing me. The news articles calling me a thief would exist forever on the internet. This was the price of fighting monsters. They hurt you on the way down. A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. Just one. Then I wiped it away, sat up, and began doing push-ups in the small space of my cell. 25, 50, 75. Building heat in my muscles, burning away the fear and doubt. My mother had taught me this, back when kids in elementary school made fun of my accent, when teachers assumed I couldn't speak English properly, when the world tried to make me feel small. "They can take your freedom temporarily," she'd said in Mandarin, her hands strong on my shoulders. "They can take your comfort, but they can never take your spine unless you let them. Stand tall, Lily. Always stand tall." At 6 a.m., breakfast arrived. Cold eggs and stale toast. I ate every bite. At 7:30, a public defender showed up, looking overworked and underpaid, ready to convince me to take a plea deal. I declined politely. At 8:45, Officer Martinez appeared at my cell. "Chen, you're being transferred. Federal custody." The other inmates watched as he cuffed me again and led me through the precinct. We passed Richard's office. Through the glass window, I could see him on the phone, laughing about something. Probably telling another journalist his version of the story, building his narrative before I could build mine. He glanced up as we walked past. Our eyes met for just a second. He smirked and raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. "Enjoy your last hour of freedom, Captain," I thought. "Because everything you've built is about to collapse." The federal building stood 12 stories tall in downtown, all glass and steel and the kind of institutional authority that made even innocent people nervous. 2 U.S. Marshals escorted me through a side entrance, away from the media trucks already gathering at the front steps. Someone had leaked that something big was happening this morning. They just didn't know what yet. Marcus waited in a conference room on the 8th floor, along with a woman I'd only met twice before, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Park. She was 42, Korean-American, with a reputation for taking down corrupt officials that had earned her both respect and enemies throughout the justice system. "Miss Chun." Jennifer stood and shook my hand firmly, her grip strong despite my cuffs. "I apologize for the conditions of your arrival." Captain Bennett moved faster than we anticipated. "He knew something was coming," I said, as the marshals removed my handcuffs. My wrists were bruised, marked with red lines from where Richard had deliberately tightened them. "He's been paranoid for weeks." Marcus handed me a bottle of water and a breakfast sandwich from the cafe downstairs. Real food. I nearly cried at the simple kindness of it. "We need to move quickly," Jennifer said, opening a laptop and turning it toward me. "Captain Bennett is already giving interviews. He's positioned himself as the hero cop who caught his own daughter's criminal wife. The narrative is spreading fast." On the screen, Richard stood outside the precinct in full uniform, medals gleaming, looking every inch the decorated officer. The headline beneath him read, "Decorated police captain arrests daughter's wife in evidence theft." "He's good," Marcus muttered. "I'll give him that. 20 years of practice lying to cameras. But we're better," Jennifer said, clicking to another window. "Lily, show me everything. All of it. Every piece of evidence you've collected over the past 6 months." I pulled out the flash drive they'd retrieved from my personal effects. "It's all encrypted. Password is Sarah's birthday plus the badge number I had when I was on the force." What they didn't know, what I'd kept even from Marcus until this moment, was how deep my investigation had actually gone. 6 months ago, right after Sarah told her family we were married, Richard had pulled me aside at a barbecue. We'd stood by his pool, expensive scotch in his hand, and he'd made his position clear. "I don't care what liberal nonsense my daughter believes," he'd said quietly, making sure no one else could hear. "You're not family, you're a phase. And if you don't walk away voluntarily, I'll make sure you lose everything. Your business, your reputation, your freedom. I've destroyed better people than you, Lily. Don't test me." I'd smiled politely, thanked him for the drink, and walked away. Then I'd spent the next week setting up the most comprehensive surveillance operation of my career. The flash drive contained 6 months of evidence, but it started much earlier than that. I'd been documenting Richard's activities for over a year, ever since Sarah first introduced me to her family, and I'd recognized something familiar in her father's eyes. The same look I'd seen in the eyes of dirty cops I'd worked with before I left the force. Arrogance mixed with paranoia. The expression of someone who'd been breaking the law so long they believed they were untouchable. Jennifer's eyes widened as she scrolled through the files. Lily, this is extraordinary. How did you get access to his bank accounts?" "I didn't hack anything," I said carefully. "I have a source inside his bank. Someone he screwed over 3 years ago when he arrested her brother on false charges. She's been waiting for someone to actually do something with the information." Marcus leaned forward. "The deposits every 2 weeks. 5,000 exactly. That's the Serpientes standard payment for police protection, isn't it?" "Exactly. And I have photos of every single meeting between Richard and Snake Delgado going back 8 months. 12 meetings total. Always at the same warehouse on 5th Street. Always between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. 5th Street warehouse ... Jennifer pulled up another file. "That's the same location where 3 different drug busts went wrong. Officers arrived too late. Product already moved. We suspected a leak but could never prove it." "It wasn't a leak," I said. "It was Richard. He was tipping off the Serpientes before every raid, giving them time to move their operation. In exchange, they paid him protection money and kicked back a percentage of their drug sales." The room went silent except for the clicking of Jennifer's keyboard as she cross-referenced my evidence with federal case files. "How did you photograph meetings at 2 a.m. without being spotted?" Marcus asked. "I didn't take the photos." I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a contact labeled AR. "Do you remember Andre Richardson? Used to work narcotics before he retired?" Marcus's face went pale. "Andre Richardson. The best undercover operative the department ever had. He retired 5 years ago after ... After Richard set him up to take the fall for a botched operation." I finished. "Andre lost his pension, his reputation, nearly lost his marriage. He's been waiting for revenge ever since. When I approached him 4 months ago with what I'd found, he volunteered to help. Former narcotics cop knows how to run surveillance without being detected." Jennifer was smiling now. The kind of smile prosecutors get when they know they have an airtight case. "Andre Richardson's testimony will be incredibly valuable. A decorated former narcotics officer with no criminal record, testifying against his former captain." "There's more," I said. "Maria Gonzalez, the woman whose son Richard framed 3 years ago. She's willing to testify. So is David Park, the defense attorney Richard tried to bribe last year. So is Officer Jennifer Martinez, Richard's own officer, who witnessed him planting evidence twice but was too afraid to report it until now." Marcus stared at me. "How did you find all these people?" "I'm a private investigator, Marcus. It's literally my job to find people who don't want to be found." I took a long drink of water. "Richard thinks I'm just some nobody who got lucky marrying his daughter. He has no idea I spent 4 years in major crimes before I left the force. He never bothered to actually look at my record because he dismissed me the moment he saw my face. His prejudice made him sloppy," Jennifer said, nodding. "Classic mistake. He underestimated you because of who you are, not what you're capable of." "Exactly. And that sloppiness is going to destroy him." Jennifer closed the laptop and stood. "Lily, I want to be completely transparent with you about what happens next." In approximately ... She checked her watch. 43 minutes. Federal agents will arrest Captain Richard Bennett at his home. He'll be charged with 17 counts including corruption, drug trafficking, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. The media will have the story within an hour. Your name will be cleared. The charges against you dropped. But I could hear the hesitation in her voice. But the damage to your reputation won't disappear overnight. Some people will always believe Richard's version of events. Some of your clients won't come back. And Sarah's family double quotes. Jennifer paused. They're going to have to choose between believing their husband and father is a criminal, or believing you somehow framed him. That's going to be ugly. I thought about this during the long hours in that cell. The cost of exposing Richard wasn't just his freedom. It was Sarah's relationship with her family. Her mother, her brother, her aunts and uncles and cousins who'd grown up believing Richard Bennett was a hero. Sarah knows, I said quietly. She told me to burn his world down. Her words exactly. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder. For what it's worth, Lily, you're the bravest investigator I've ever worked with. You could have walked away, divorced Sarah, moved to another city, started over. Instead, you collected evidence on one of the most dangerous cops in the city, knowing he could destroy you at any moment. I didn't have a choice, I said. The moment I fell in love with Sarah, the moment we got married, Richard became my problem. He wasn't going to let us be happy. He was going to spend the rest of his life trying to break us apart. The only way to stop him was to stop him permanently. Jennifer's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled. Federal agents are in position. It's time. They led me to a viewing room with a live video feed. Multiple screens showing different angles. Richard's house, the precinct, the federal courthouse steps where Jennifer would give a press conference in less than 2 hours. On the main screen, I watched 6 federal agents approach the Bennett mansion. The same house where I'd been arrested less than 24 hours ago. The same dining room where Richard had humiliated me in front of his entire family. Richard answered the door in his bathrobe, coffee mug still in hand. The confusion on his face when he saw the FBI jackets was almost worth every terrible thing he'd put me through. Almost. Captain Richard Bennett. The lead agent's voice came through the audio feed. You're under arrest for corruption, drug trafficking, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Richard's face went from confused to pale to red with rage in seconds. This is insane. I'm a decorated police captain. You can't just... We have 17 federal warrants, Captain. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Patricia appeared behind him in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. Sarah emerged seconds later, still in pajamas, her face unreadable. She'd known this was coming, but watching it happen was different than imagining it. Richard fought as they cuffed him, shouting about lawyers and wrongful arrest and conspiracy. The neighbors were coming out now, phones recording, just like they'd recorded my arrest yesterday. The difference was that Richard's arrest would be everywhere by noon. How does it feel? Marcus asked quietly, standing beside me. Watching him go down? I thought about the question. About the year I'd spent building this case. About the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I was doing the right thing, if destroying Sarah's father was worth it, if there was any other way. It feels like justice, I said finally. Incomplete, messy justice. But justice nonetheless. Jennifer appeared in the doorway. Lily, we need you at the press conference. The whole city needs to hear your side of the story. They need to understand that this isn't revenge. This is accountability. I looked down at my clothes. Still the same outfit I'd worn to Thanksgiving dinner yesterday, now wrinkled and stained from a night in holding. I look like I just got out of jail. You did just get out of jail, Marcus said with a slight smile. But you're also the woman who just took down the most corrupt cop in the city. Own it. 2 hours later, I stood beside Jennifer Park on the federal courthouse steps. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Behind me, Marcus and 3 other law enforcement officials who'd agreed to support the prosecution. Beside me, evidence boxes being carried into the building by federal agents. And in the crowd wearing sunglasses but impossible to miss stood Sarah. She'd come, despite everything. Despite her father being arrested. Despite her mother probably disowning her. She'd chosen to stand with me publicly, where everyone could see. Jennifer stepped up to the microphone. Good morning. I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Park. And I'm here to announce the arrest of Captain Richard Bennett on 17 federal charges related to corruption and drug trafficking. Double quotes as she spoke. Laying out the case we built piece by piece over 6 months, I felt something shift. Not relief exactly. Not triumph. Just the quiet certainty that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to fight the monsters who threaten them. Even when those monsters wear badges and uniforms and the appearance of respectability. Richard had tried to destroy me because he'd assumed I was weak. He'd underestimated me because of my race, my gender, my background. He'd believed his power and connections made him untouchable. He'd been wrong about all of it. But the real battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The press conference lasted 40 minutes. Jennifer methodically presented each piece of evidence while I stood silent beside her, letting the facts speak louder than any words I could offer. When she finished, the reporters erupted with questions, but one voice cut through the chaos. "Ms. Chun, how does it feel knowing your father-in-law tried to frame you?" I stepped to the microphone. The crowd quieted, cameras focusing on my face, still marked with exhaustion from a night in jail. "Captain Bennett made a critical error," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "He assumed that because I was quiet, I was powerless. Because I didn't fight back when he insulted me at family dinners. He thought I wouldn't fight back when he came after my freedom." I paused, looking directly into the cameras. "He forgot that investigators don't announce their investigations. We work in silence until we have everything we need. And now we do." By noon, the story had exploded across every news outlet in the city. The security footage Richard had used to frame me was analyzed by federal experts and declared a sophisticated deepfake. The real footage from the evidence locker showed Richard himself at 2 a.m., removing cash and replacing it with marked bills he'd later used to plant in my office during an anonymous tip search that never happened because he'd arrested me first. The timeline of his plan unraveled beautifully under scrutiny. He'd spent 3 weeks preparing the frame job, coordinating with Officer Dawson to create fake reports, manipulating security systems, even bribing the evidence clerk to alter intake logs. Every step documented. Every person involved now cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. At 2 p.m., the police commissioner held his own press conference. I watched from Jennifer's office, Sarah beside me now, her hand gripping mine so tightly my fingers went numb. Effective immediately, Captain Richard Bennett has been terminated from the police department. His badge, service weapon, and all department credentials have been revoked. Furthermore, we are launching an internal investigation into every case he's touched in the past 15 years. Any individual who believes they were wrongfully convicted or targeted by Captain Bennett should contact our Internal Affairs Division. 15 years, Marcus said from the doorway. That's over 2,000 cases potentially compromised. This is going to tear the department apart, the commissioner continued, his face grim. We also owe an apology to Ms. Lily Chen, who was falsely arrested and publicly humiliated by an officer we trusted with authority. Ms. Chen, if you're watching, the department will be reaching out to discuss restitution and clearing your record completely. Sarah's phone exploded with messages. Her mother, her brother, relatives demanding to know if she'd known about the investigation, if she'd helped set up her own father. Each message more accusatory than the last. Block them, I said quietly. All of them. You don't owe anyone an explanation. My mother says I've destroyed the family, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. She says I should have warned Dad that you were investigating him. Your mother is married to a criminal, Marcus said bluntly. She's either in denial or she was complicit. Either way, her opinion doesn't matter right now. At 4 p.m., Richard's arraignment was televised. I'd never seen anything like it. A courtroom packed with journalists, victims of his corruption, and fellow officers who'd suspected him for years but never had proof. Richard stood in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive lawyer beside him looking increasingly desperate as the federal prosecutor read charge after charge. Count 1. Conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Count 2. Accepting bribes from a criminal organization. Count 3. Evidence tampering. Double quotes 17 counts total. each one carrying a minimum sentence of 5 to 10 years. Richard's face transformed as the reality set in. The arrogance drained away, replaced by something I'd never seen in him before. Genuine fear. His lawyer requested bail. Jennifer stood and methodically explained why Richard Bennett was a flight risk. Multiple offshore accounts recently discovered. A second passport under a false name found in his home safe, and credible threats he'd made against witnesses including his own daughter. The judge, a stern black woman in her 60s, didn't hesitate. Bail denied. Mr. Bennett will remain in federal custody until trial. Richard's head snapped up. You can't do this! I've served this city for 30 years. I have rights. You had rights, the judge corrected coldly. You forfeited them when you chose to abuse your badge. Bailiff, remove Mr. Bennett from my courtroom. As they led him away, Richard turned and scanned the crowd until his eyes found mine in the back row. The look he gave me was pure hatred, stripped of any pretense of civility. This was the real Richard Bennett, the man behind the medals and the polished speeches. A bully who'd finally met someone he couldn't intimidate. I held his gaze and did something I'd never done before in his presence. I smiled. By evening, the social media response had shifted completely. The hashtags that had called me a thief yesterday now called me a hero. Hashtag Justice for Lily trended nationally. Videos of my arrest at Thanksgiving dinner were recontextualized with captions like, "Watch a corrupt cop frame an innocent woman, and this is what abuse of power looks like." 3 of my former clients called to apologize and rehire me. Then 5 more, then a dozen. My inbox flooded with requests from people who wanted to hire the investigator who'd taken down a decorated police captain. But the most satisfying moment came at 8 p.m., when local news aired interviews with Richard's victims. Maria Gonzalez, whose son had spent 3 years in prison for drugs Richard planted. David Chen, no relation to me but targeted anyway, who'd lost his restaurant when Richard falsely accused him of health code violations after refusing to pay protection money. Jennifer Martinez, the officer who'd witnessed Richard's crimes, but was too terrified to speak up until now. One by one, they told their stories. The camera captured their tears, their anger, their relief that someone had finally stopped him. And each interview ended the same way. Thank you, Lily Chen. Thank you for being brave enough to stand up when the rest of us couldn't. Sarah watched beside me, crying quietly as the scope of her father's cruelty became undeniable. I knew he was hard, she whispered. I knew he could be mean. But this... He destroyed so many lives, Lily. How did I not see it? Because he was your father, I said, pulling her close. Children aren't supposed to investigate their parents, but I wasn't his child. I was his threat. And threats get eliminated or they eliminate you. At 10 p.m., Patricia Bennett appeared on the news, standing outside the family mansion with her lawyer. I expected her to defend Richard, to claim innocence or conspiracy. Instead, she read from a prepared statement, her voice shaking. I am filing for divorce from Richard Bennett, effective immediately. I will be cooperating fully with federal investigators. I had no knowledge of my husband's criminal activities, but I acknowledge I ignored warning signs I should have recognized. To the victims of his crimes, I offer my sincerest apologies. Sarah's breath caught. Mom filed for divorce. She chose right. She chose survival, Marcus corrected gently. Patricia is smart enough to know that standing by Richard now means going down with him. This is self-preservation, not morality. Maybe he was right. Maybe Patricia was just protecting herself. But watching Sarah's face as her mother made that statement, I saw something shift. The family that had seemed so unbreakable yesterday was fracturing in real time, and from those fractures, maybe something healthier could grow. Jennifer called at midnight. Lily, you should know that 3 more officers have come forward with information about Richard's operation. We're looking at expanding the charges. He might be facing 30 years instead of 20. 30 years. Richard was 54. He'd likely die in prison. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt exhausted. Vindicated but hollowed out by the sheer scope of destruction his corruption had caused. How many lives had he ruined? How many families had he torn apart? How many people had spent years in prison for crimes they didn't commit because Richard Bennett needed to maintain his clearance rate or eliminate someone who threatened his operation? Lily? Jennifer's voice pulled me back. Are you okay? I'm alive, I said. I'm free. My wife still loves me. That's more than a lot of his victims can say. After we hung up, Sarah and I sat in the hotel room Jennifer had arranged for us, neither of us willing to go back to our house yet, to the space that still felt contaminated by Richard's presence in our lives. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we rebuild, I said. We testify at his trial. We watch him face justice. We figure out what our marriage looks like when your father isn't trying to destroy it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I want to work with you. As an investigator, there are other Richard Bennetts out there, Lily. Other corrupt cops and abusive officials. If we took him down, we can take them down too. I looked at my wife, seeing her clearly maybe for the first time since this nightmare began. Not as the captain's daughter anymore, but as her own person, choosing her own path. Then that's what we'll do, I said. If you've been following this story, subscribe to see how justice looks 6 months later when Richard's trial finally begins. Because sometimes the most important part of a story isn't the moment the villain falls, but what the survivors build from the wreckage. Outside our hotel window, the city stretched out in a grid of lights. Somewhere in that grid, Richard Bennett sat in a federal holding cell, finally powerless. Somewhere else, his victims were sleeping better than they had in years, knowing their abuser would face consequences. And in this room, Sarah and I held each other and planned our future. A future Richard had tried to prevent, but instead had inadvertently created. Because his cruelty had forced me to become the investigator who could stop him. And that investigator was now exactly what this city needed. The worst mistake Richard Bennett ever made wasn't framing me for theft. It was underestimating what I'd become to protect the woman I loved. He'd threatened to destroy my life, never realizing that threat would transform me into the weapon that would end his. 6 months later, I stood in the same federal courtroom where Richard had been arraigned, but this time as a witness, not a defendant. The trial had lasted 3 weeks, every day revealing new layers of corruption that made national headlines. Richard sat at the defense table looking nothing like the decorated captain who'd arrested me at Thanksgiving. Prison had stripped away his polish. His expensive suits had been replaced with a cheap blazer his lawyer provided. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced with something harder to watch. The desperate awareness of a man watching his life collapse in slow motion. The prosecution called me to the stand on day 19. As I walked past Richard's table, our eyes met briefly. He looked away first. Jennifer approached with a tablet containing the evidence I'd spent a year collecting. Miss Chun, can you explain to the jury how you first became aware of Captain Bennett's criminal activities? I described the investigation methodically, professionally, letting the facts speak for themselves. The secret meetings photographed at 2 a.m., the bank deposits that didn't match his salary. The victims who'd been too afraid to speak until someone finally listened. Richard's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, as a scorned daughter-in-law seeking revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements don't lie. Photographs don't have agendas. 17 witnesses corroborating the same pattern of abuse and corruption couldn't all be mistaken. When the jury returned after 4 hours of deliberation, the foreman stood. On count 1, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, accepting bribes from a criminal organization, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty. 17 times, every single count. Richard's face went pale. His expensive lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but there was nothing left to say. The evidence had been too thorough, the testimony too credible, the pattern too clear. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, federal investigators had expanded their investigation to 4 other officers in Richard's unit who'd been complicit in his schemes. The corruption had been deeper than anyone suspected, reaching into the highest levels of the department. On sentencing day, the courtroom was packed with victims finally getting their day in court. Maria Gonzalez sat in the front row, her son beside her, free after his conviction had been overturned. David Chen brought his entire family, his restaurant thriving again after the false health violations were expunged. Officer Martinez sat with 3 other cops who'd been silenced by Richard's threats for years. The judge, her expression grave, addressed Richard directly. "Mr. Bennett, you were given a badge and the public's trust. Instead of protecting your community, you preyed upon it. You planted evidence, accepted bribes, destroyed innocent lives, and when someone threatened to expose you, you attempted to frame them for your own crimes." She paused, letting the words settle. "The court sentences you to 32 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution to your victims totaling $847,000. Your pension is permanently revoked. You will never hold public office or law enforcement position again. 32 years. Richard would be 86 if he lived to see release. As they led him away in chains, Richard turned one last time toward the gallery. His eyes found Sarah, sitting beside me, her hand in mine. For a moment I saw something that might have been regret cross his face. But then it was gone, replaced by the bitter anger of a man who'd never truly believed consequences would find him. Sarah squeezed my hand tighter. We'd spent 6 months in therapy together, working through the trauma of discovering her father's true nature, rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. She'd chosen me over her family's approval, chosen truth over comfortable lies. That choice had cost her. Her mother spoke to her only through lawyers now. Her brother had blocked her number. Cousins she'd grown up with treated her like a traitor. But she'd also gained something. Freedom. The ability to build a life based on her own values instead of her father's expectations. Outside the courthouse, journalists surrounded us immediately. I'd learned to handle media attention over the past months, learned that my story resonated with people who'd faced their own powerful abusers and wondered if justice was possible. "Miss Chun, how does it feel to see Captain Bennett sentenced?" "It feels like accountability," I said. "Not revenge. Accountability. For too long, people with badges and power have operated above the law. Today proves that nobody is untouchable when citizens are willing to stand up and document the truth." "Will you continue working as a private investigator?" I smiled. "Actually, my wife and I are opening a new firm, Chun and Bennett Investigations, specializing in cases of police corruption and abuse of power. We want to help other victims find the evidence they need to hold their abusers accountable." Sarah stepped forward. "My father tried to destroy Lily because she threatened his power. Instead, he created exactly what he feared most. An investigator with personal understanding of how corrupt officials operate. We're going to use that knowledge to help others." The business had already received over 50 inquiries. People who'd been framed, harassed, or targeted by officials who thought they were protected. Each case would be carefully vetted, but the demand was real. Richard's conviction had shown people that fighting back was possible. My original pie business had recovered too. Clients who dropped me after my arrest had returned with apologies and new contracts. The publicity from the trial had brought national attention. I'd been interviewed by 3 major news outlets, featured in a documentary about police corruption, and invited to speak at conferences about conducting civilian investigations into law enforcement. The vindication was sweet, but the real satisfaction came from watching Richard's victims reclaim their lives. Maria Gonzalez's son had enrolled in community college, studying criminal justice because he wanted to help reform the system that had failed him. David Chen had opened a second restaurant. Officer Martinez had been promoted to sergeant and was leading ethics training for new recruits. 3 months after the sentencing, Sarah and I bought a house. Nothing extravagant. Just a 3-bedroom craftsman with a small yard and a home office where we could run our investigation firm. The first night in our new home, we sat on the porch watching the sunset, finally able to breathe without looking over our shoulders. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Everything you went through. The arrest, the humiliation, the risk. Was it worth it?" I thought about that Thanksgiving dinner where I'd been handcuffed in front of Richard's entire family. About the night in the holding cell, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. About the 6 months of building a case while pretending everything was fine, knowing one wrong move could get me killed or imprisoned. "Every second of it," I said. Because the alternative was spending the rest of our lives under his control. Walking on eggshells, watching him destroy other people while we stayed silent. That's not a life, Sarah. That's just slow suffocation. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Mom called yesterday. First time in 6 months. What did she say? That she's filing to reclaim part of Dad's pension for herself and wants to know if I'll testify that she didn't know about his crimes. Sarah's voice was flat. Not I'm sorry, not I was wrong about you and Lily. Just legal strategy. Some relationships couldn't be saved. Patricia had chosen self-preservation over acknowledging the damage she'd enabled. Maybe someday that would change. Maybe someday Sarah would have a mother who saw her clearly and loved what she saw. But that was Patricia's journey to make, not ours to force. We have each other, I said, and we have work that matters. That's enough. Richard's final letter arrived a week later, forwarded through his lawyer. Sarah opened it with shaking hands, then read it aloud. You destroyed my life, my career, my reputation, my freedom. I hope you're satisfied. You were never good enough for my daughter, and now she's throwing away her future to play detective with a woman who couldn't even keep her badge. Tell Sarah she can visit if she ever realizes what she's lost. Sarah set the letter down, then lit a match and dropped it in the fireplace, watching it burn. He still doesn't understand, she said. He thinks you took something from me. He can't comprehend that you gave me something. The courage to choose truth over comfort. The letter represented everything Richard had been, unable to take responsibility, unable to see his daughter as anything but an extension of himself, unable to imagine that his version of success wasn't the only path worth taking. A year after that Thanksgiving arrest, Chun and Bennett Investigations had a staff of 5 and a waiting list of clients. We'd helped expose 2 more corrupt officials, exonerated 3 innocent people, and built a reputation as investigators who couldn't be intimidated or bought. Sarah had found her calling. Turned out the captain's daughter understood police procedures better than most investigators, knew how to navigate department politics, and had inherited her father's strategic mind without his cruelty. She was brilliant at connecting patterns, at seeing the bigger picture others missed. And me? I transformed from a private investigator just trying to survive into someone who understood that sometimes the most important investigations aren't about catching criminals. They're about protecting the innocent from people who hide their cruelty behind badges and authority. Richard Bennett tried to destroy me because I loved his daughter and didn't fit his vision of the perfect family. He failed because he underestimated the power of someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. He thought my silence meant weakness. He learned too late that sometimes the quietest people are just gathering evidence. The best revenge isn't stooping to your enemy's level. It's standing tall while they fall, then using your voice to make sure no one else suffers what you endured. Richard wanted to make me small. Instead, he gave me a purpose bigger than anything I'd imagined. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced someone who tried to destroy you for daring to exist in their world, remember this. Document everything, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that speaking truth is worse than enduring injustice. Sometimes the person everyone respects is the one who most needs to be exposed. And sometimes the person everyone dismisses is exactly who will bring them down. Stand tall. Gather your evidence. And when the moment comes, don't flinch. Justice delayed is painful. But justice delivered is worth every terrible moment it took to achieve it.